All right.
All right, so I'm here for you. So, what do you want to talk about? What can I do for you?
It would be nice if you could just introduce who you are
Oh,
and what you do.
of course. I'm sorry. Of course. Well, I'm from Argentina. I was born there, and I came to the U.S. 12 years ago. I came to Colombia because I'm a journalist. I also have a degree in philosophy, which was my first. Uh, in Argentina, as in most Latin American countries and in Europe also, the high education system is different from here. When you go out from high school, you go to a 4 year structure like here, like college here, but you go directly into a 5 or 7 year career track, what they call careers, which are there's no real equivalent here because it's not a master's, it's below a master's degree and it's more than a typical BA. So I went to the School of Philosophy and Letters, that's the name of the school, where we have philosophy, letters, education, um, history, geography at the time. Then they created a School of Social Sciences when I was about to graduate, so I ended up then teaching there. But at the time, I was most of my studies. It was at this place where we have people studying, trying to get a degree in all these disciplines. So it was humanities, but it was also part of social sciences, like history and I think it was also social work. I don't remember very much. And I wanted to write. Basically, primarily, I consider myself a writer, so I didn't want to go straight into a academic life. That was before masters, MA became the usual means of living for most writers and artists in general. I mean, I'm talking. I know I'm talking about what I went into school and university by the time your parents probably were born in 1980, so it's quite a long time ago. And I graduated. I took my time. I do some diversion in the middle, so I graduated in 1991. So that's another thing about the Latin American education, higher education system. Very few people graduate before 7 years of study, and I think it's a good thing about this American college system, British colleges, that you have 4 years, because it's normally the time that an adolescent or a young person takes to decide where they want to go in life. And what happened in my experience with many people my age and in my country and all that, maybe you spend 2 3 years in doing philosophy, and then you switch to letters because after being 3 years in philosophy, you think it's worth it. And then you spend another 2 years in letters, and by the time you are 30, you're still switching, and you have to work and you have kids, and so you drop out of university without a degree, but having been 5 average years in higher education, but without the degree. So I think that the college system is wonderful in terms of exactly that's what a major does, right? I mean, you go, you start taking courses, and you concentrate on something, you major in something, and then you can have all your options quite open, right? And after 4 years, you're out and you have a degree, and that's fantastic. So I didn't want to. By the time I graduated, I was already working in journalism, and I wanted to. Well, I always had a very civic-minded interest. I mean, I wanted to do things for. I grew up in a time that you might have heard of and read in the books of where Latin America was full of dictatorships. And in Argentina, my country, was a very famous dictatorship. Maybe you have heard of the disappeared people, the desaparecidos. That was one feature of that regime where thousands of people were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. And that happened throughout Latin America, just Guatemala and other parts. But in Argentina, was particularly harsh and very famous. And for instance, the technology to treat, to discover the use of DNA to put an identity on people without a name, unknown people, was developed and was first put into practice in Argentina by Clyde Snow, which is an American anthropologist who worked on that, to with disappeared people who were found in mass graves or in individual graves. By that time was 10 years after they had been killed, probably, or even less than that, but they didn't have a name. So the DNA, and now that's the standard way of proving identity for any case of people. So that was one, unforeseen consequence of that part of history. And so I grew up in a middle class, typical middle class Argentinian families from Buenos Aires, another place that is very well known in this country. And so politics is very much politics, and the awareness of social and political issues was very much part of my mecca, right? And so it's of my particular personal history, but also the history of my generation and my countrymen, fellow country people in general. So I wanted to do something beyond the mere academic work. I wanted to go and write fiction and poetry and those kind of things, but also to do some work that could affect more directly the world, right? And that's what journalism provides you with a platform to interact with everyday, real, serious, critical issues. I also remember there was that in the mid 1980s. There was a revival of interest in Argentina on the issue of the two cultures. You might have heard of that, right? Scientific C.P. Snow versus F.D. Levis. There were two British philosophers. One was a philosopher, and one was a scientist, and they was a linguist and a scientist. And C.P. Snow is the author of this book called The Two Cultures, which just was celebrating the 50th anniversary, and this was a major discussion 50 years ago. And you immediately recognize that this is the familiarity of this thing today. Whether the scientific disciplines, the hard sciences, were more important than the humanities or not, and you have to think that humanities used to be the whole of the higher education. At some point in the Middle Ages, where we all come from, the university comes from that. The titles, the BAs, all the Latin names that you bear comes from the time the university was invented in Europe, the way you know it, in the Middle Ages. And so for many centuries, actually, up until the beginning of the 20th century, especially in Europe and in this country also, an educated person, who was considered an educated person? An educated person was someone who could read the classics, could read a few language other than their own native language, and maybe have some knowledge about music or play music, because it was also part of it before the invasion of the automatic music recording. The only way you could listen to music was performing yourself, right? Or go to the theater, right? Or you couldn't go and put a record on the machine or the CD or whatever. You have to assemble the people and start playing or singing, whatever. So that was part of what was going on. And that was basically humanistic education, right? So humanities is basically, and the sciences were like in the back seat of what was. So there was like a traditional division there, and of course this is not. Most famous scientists were also, because they had this education in general, were also people who could read the classics and read Latin etc. But of course, after the 19th century, that divide grew bigger and bigger, and so there was, and also there is a political and social reason that you can afford spending many years just learning the classics or literature on the arts if you don't have to care about building engineering, building bridges and cities and or facilities for people who need, running water and all the urban necessities of today. And so the discussion was very much part of the everyday life of intellectual people and the political class, the learned class, or the political class, for most of the 20th century. And so when this debate emerged with C.P. Snow wrote this book, it was quite of a roar about it, right? So today it may seem like completely dated, and yet a lot of discussion that's going on today with different authors and books is about the value of humanities. For instance, does humanities have any value at all? Or sciences, should we all drop the study of humanities and concentrate on what is that good? Is that what we should do? Is there any profit in learning literature or making a person knowledgeable of the arts, of the religions of the world, of the different cultures? So I think that the debate is still pertinent, is still relevant, even perhaps not in the way or the fashion it was phrased 50 or 100 years ago, but I think it's still relevant. And so, as I said, I found that journalism, in my case, was the perfect way of overlapping all those different interests. I was also very much interested in economics, so because it's not just for a theoretical reason, but because economics has to do with the practical issues of everyday life and people, right? And in a country like Argentina that went through all those extreme variations in economic life, from hyperinflation to hyper devaluations and hyper everything, my personal life has been marked by this huge economic crisis. So that, I mean, you are kids of the last long recession, right? But to me, that you have to think, in my case, that's just the fourth of, at least the fourth of all the big crises I've been through in my life, that personally were much deeper to me than this last one. But then, so economics was, and journalism allowed me to do something that when you are in the academic life, you're not supposed to do, or you're supposed to write something only after you've been, you've read through all the bibliography on one subject, and you're supposed to be a specialist and an expert on the narrower sense of the word. That's to make you focus on a very specific part of knowledge and make you a great expert on that, right? And journalism is apparently exactly the opposite of that, where you can talk or write or research about almost everything, which is not exactly true. You cannot talk never about everything, but you can, become a sort of an expert for a short time, on a certain subject which is of your interest. You can dedicate enough time to do some research and work on something, and do that, on a scale and a variety of issues and things that are not allowed in the academy. And yet it is valuable because, among other things, because that's one of the ways in which the academic research and work can reach out to the larger society through journalism, through the media, etc. So I came to New York then with a very general idea of what it was. I came to New York. I came to the United States, but I came to New York specifically. I wanted to be here, but I was interested in learning about what already in the late 1980s was talked about all over the world, the Hispanization of the Latinization of the United States. And I was interested in that from a perspective that is slightly different from the perspective you can have in this country, from a more cultural, literary perspective. And of course, I was aware of all the Latino writers and Latino literature, and the Puerto Rican poets and West Side Story and all that kind of stuff. So, and my humanist part and my literary culture side was very much interested in learning and understanding more about the phenomenon of what it was, the Latino culture in the United States. And when I came to New York, it was really I was prepared to a certain degree, because some of my friends have been studying here at Columbia, and colleagues from the University of Buenos Aires have been doing their PhD here. So I knew, for instance, that already in 1990, you could walk around New York without speaking one word of English and just speaking Spanish, and it could make your life that. That was, so I knew that, but of course I wasn't totally prepared to see the extreme diversity of all the Latino, Spanish language, English language, all the mix of things from people from all different, and of course that in the middle of the huge human laboratory that New York is. So my first reaction was that I wanted to write a book on that. A book that I had the title for the book before having any page written. It was Hispanic New York. I wanted to do a book that represented all that experience. And I knew Professor Andrew Del Banco, who was a former director of this center. He accepted me in his class. I knew him through journalism because a friend of mine introduced me to him as a journalist, Paul Berman, and Del Banco was gracious enough to take me in his class. I wasn't supposed to be there because I was here on a master's degree track in journalism, and his course was a course for was a 200 or 300 course, something like that. So it was for undergrads. So I was taking an undergrad course, like American pre-Civil War civilization. But in a sense, that course and that experience marked the following decade up to now, and this conversation we're having here in this place, right? And after I graduated in journalism school, I kept in touch with Del Banco, and when he was appointed here 10 years ago, he invited me to develop all this interest in the Latino, Latin American, Hispanic thing here. So I wrote that book. It was an anthology, Hispanic New York. I started teaching a seminar, which is the one I was teaching tonight here, teaching for 2 or 3 years, because you cannot teach that class every year. You have to wait until there's a new population or refreshment of the demand of students. And that was originally the reader I assembled for that class. And so he helped me publish that. Went to Columbia University Press. He put the money for making a book is an interesting thing also. And all kinds of books. But an anthology is a long process, and you have to, to collect the book, to make the selections, and then look for the rights. I mean, it's a long process. Interesting. And so that's how we met. And that's how we all come together here. This is basically my presentation.
So can Fatima, can we jump to your question and then Anna's follow-up question?
Yeah, I think it was.
I'm sorry it was a long book.
No,
it's
very
thank you.
You have much
It's
more
a-
interesting life.
And you've answered many of the
Well,
questions
thank
that
you.
we were going to
Yeah.
ask, so I think we can jump to that.
Well, that's great.
So our question for you is, what would your ideal immigration reform bill look like?
Well, ideally, I would say that yes, I think that it would be what is called a path to citizenship after some clearance period, and that mostly because of political reasons. I mean, there is a huge incentive to one party to pass the bill and huge incentive to another person not to pass the bill, which is, and this is not as mathematical as it sounds, but most Latinos, including most Latino immigrants, that is, most immigrants from Latin America, and the distinction is important at some point, are supposed to lean Democratic. I'm not sure we really know what immigrants lean to, because the polls that are done on Latino population here, that's a big sample, and so. But let's say that supposedly 60% or more of the Latino population in general lean Democratic. So of course, Democrats would be very pleased to grant citizenship potentially to 12 million people, which is 11 million people, which is supposed. Of course, not all of them vote, but I don't remember the exact figure now. I think it was like 50,000 young Latinos are coming of age every month. It's something that's huge. It's a very huge, impressive number. So let's say that 50% would vote, which is not the percentage of Latino voters, right? It's, Latinos vote rate is about what, 34% or 40%. I don't remember exactly. It's the lesser of all the groups. So let's assume that 40% of that 50,000 young Latinos vote, and that of those